Continuing on with our program and moving into the area of safety, we have Officer Lee Cooper, who is going to be talking to us about distracted driving and how it affects each and every one of us. Officer Cooper.
Thank you. I'm Officer Lee Cooper with the Kennewick Police Department. This month is actually my 9th anniversary on the traffic unit with the police department. So I've been riding a motorcycle, investigating collisions, and enforcing the traffic laws of the state of Washington here in Kennewick for 9 years now. And as Dr. Person said, we have a lot of data to look at today. So I'm going to try to buzz through some data to look at and then share some stories towards the end. So when I start in on all the data, please don't think it's going to be 20 minutes of a statistical analysis here. We're going to get through the first part of it so we can set up and frame the problem here and frame the idea. Before we jump into that, I do want to do one thing, because it's easy for us to look at these problems and point the finger around at everyone else. So I want to have an audience participation survey here. I'm going to ask you to raise your hand to a few different things, and I want you to keep your hands up, and we'll look around the room and see who all's hands are up here by the end of this. So let's start with the easy one. Please raise your hand if you've ever sent a text while you're driving. That got most of us. How about, and remember, keep your hands up till we're done here. How many of you have ever adjusted the clock in your car while you're driving? I got a few more people. And keep your hands up so if you texted or if you've adjusted your clock, keep your hand up. And now we'll add to that, if you've ever adjusted the stereo in your car while you're driving. That gets a lot more people. I'm trying to look around and see if we have anybody whose hand isn't up yet, because we'll keep going. How many of you have ever eaten French fries while you're driving down the road in your car? We're getting more people. So that's pretty much everybody. Look around the room here real quick. Pretty much everybody in the room has their hand up. You can put your hands down, thank you. I just want to start us off with that to show that this is a problem that's not their problem. It's not a problem that's off in the distance. It's not a problem that we don't all take part in. So we'll look at a few statistics and then we'll come back to that idea here in a minute. So this is from the Washington State Collision Clock, and as you can see on the bottom of the slide there, this data was last compiled and collected because sometimes it takes a while for the powers that be at the state to get all the data put together. So this last data that we were able to find is from 2013. But as you can see there, about every 5 minutes in Washington State, and again that's important to point out, in Washington State there was a collision. About every 20 hours someone died as a result of a collision, just here in Washington State. Someone was injured in a crash here in Washington State in a collision about every 12 minutes. And a motorcyclist was involved in a crash here in Washington State about every 4 hours. So those are important numbers to keep in mind when we think about just the number of collisions that are taking place on our roads in Washington and think about personal impact involved there. The other thing to mention as we look at these numbers, Washington State is actually one of the leading states. We're consistently in the top 2 or 3, at least in the top 5 over the last several years with road safety in the United States because of aggressive laws and tough enforcement. Washington is, again, as I said, one of the leaders. So when we think about these numbers seem really high because they are, but we actually lead the state in roadway safety. So our numbers are fairly low when you compare them to the rest of the states in the United States. So on the next slide, again, more statistics here. A pedestrian or bicyclist was involved in a crash about every 3 hours. And a pedestrian or bicyclist was killed in a crash about every 6 days. So when we think about that, really briefly, when a car runs into a car, there's a lot of protection involved there. When a car runs into a pedestrian or a bicyclist, there's really zero protection. You may have a bicycle helmet on, maybe some knee pads, maybe things like that, but really it's your body interacting with a metal vehicle. That's not a good situation to find yourself in, and that is directly related with the distracted driving, as we'll see here in a minute. A speeding driver is involved in a crash about every 30 minutes. And you'll see here this one, especially for what we're talking about today, an inattentive or distracted driver is involved in a crash about every 15 minutes. So twice as often as somebody speeding. The chief and I were talking a little bit beforehand today that used to have the big 3 collision factors. And when I was in the academy, it was the same thing because distracted driving wasn't as big of a problem then. Speeding used to be the number one factor, and we'll see that on a subsequent slide here. But it's been overtaken by inattentive driving. A person is killed in Washington State by an impaired driver on average every 2 days. And we also need to remember as well that much of the time it's not just one factor involved in these collisions. A lot of times it's a potpourri of factors involved in these collisions. There's at least 2 or 3 things going on here. A lot of these things go hand in hand. Impaired driving often goes along with distracted driving. Impaired driving and speeding. Impaired driving or distracted driving and interacting with a pedestrian or a bicyclist. So a lot of times these factors commingle and exponentially increase the risk for people to get hurt or killed in collisions. So on our next slide, there's just, again, more raw data for us here. This kind of helps frame the idea of how many vehicles are on the road. The one that struck me the most about this slide is there's 57.2 billion vehicle miles traveled annually in Washington State. Well, that was in 2013. That's probably increased since then. So if you think about that, that's a lot of vehicle miles. So the way they measure a vehicle mile is, I may drive my vehicle 100 miles today, and they figure that out annually. And each of us in here, if we drive our vehicle 100 miles today, that adds up to so many miles. They do that and figure out there's so many vehicles on the road driving so many miles annually. So it's really staggering when you think about the amount of times vehicles are not involved in a collision. So that's another good way to think about this. These numbers are high, but there's a lot of safe drivers out there, and there's a lot of safety factors that are put into place through engineering that help reduce the collisions and injuries as a result. Let's look at the last 3 bullets on this slide really quickly. You can see how many speeding citations were filed in 2013 there. And when you look below that, you can see how many cell phone and texting citations were filed. And that was within a couple of years of the laws being enacted that made it illegal to talk on your phone or to text while driving in Washington State. As you can see, there's more people caught, as you would imagine, texting or talking on their cell phone than there are arrested for DUI in Washington in 2013. So again, these are some leading factors that are involved in collisions in Washington. And oftentimes, multiple factors are involved in each collision. I'm not going to read through all of these, but you can see there the different things that go into a collision and some of the things that may be involved. And again, as you can imagine, some of these things could be mixed together. For instance, impaired driving, oftentimes people will run off the roadway. We had one, I believe it was last Wednesday. You can see there's a retaining wall that's damaged over here just outside the roundabout at Grand Ridge and Young. There was an impaired driver driving at about 12:30 in the afternoon. She tried to straighten out the corner, hit the retaining wall, and rolled her car there. So this is a problem. Today, what time are we going to get done here? Anybody? About noon. We'll be driving away about 12:30. How many of us are going to go through that roundabout? So a drunk driver crashed several feet from that roundabout the other day at 12:30. So this is a problem that we can't just say, well, I don't drive late at night on Friday, so I'm safe from these things. This is a problem that is very personal and very real for each and every one of us in this room. So now we can start kind of sharing some stories and looking at these different things. As I mentioned earlier, you'll see on the top here, the number one factor in collisions is inattentive driver or driver distractions. So the way they measure these, when we fill out a collision report, we have to put down the cause of the collision, the leading cause of the collision. A lot of times, as you can see, more than twice as often as speeding, and speeding used to be the number one factor. Now it is distracted driving or driver inattentiveness. And the thing that struck me, I didn't realize it was this high. It's twice as high as speeders. So not only has this taken over, it's taken over in a big way, and it's twice as often as excessive speed, So as we look down at these other things that we check on collision reports, fail to yield the right-of-way to a pedestrian or motor vehicle, following too closely, improper turn, or disregard a signal over the center line. We also have to ask ourselves, maybe that person was distracted as well. Because a lot of times we'll show up at a collision and we'll ask, hey, what happened here? Well, I was driving down the road. I was driving down Clearwater. It got busy. I didn't realize the light at Edison had turned red. and the car in front of me stopped way too fast and I couldn't stop in time. Well, if we don't have anything more to go on or anything more to go with, probably everything in our training experience is saying this person was probably texting or probably doing something else, which caused them to not see that the vehicle in front of them stopped and they rear-ended it. We still have to check the box that says follow me too closely, because that's all we can show and that's all we can prove. So even some of these numbers, while that number seems high, I would imagine it's way higher than it actually is on the reporting system here. Just because of that, we cannot always prove that somebody was on their phone. A lot of times the person that got rear-ended will say, yeah, I looked in my rearview mirror and I could see that person coming, and this is the view I had of them. I could see the top of their head as they came up. So how many times have you been driving down the road and you see the person next to you on the road? You can see their head bobbing. That's a telltale sign that somebody is probably texting, probably checking the numbers on their phone, doing something. So again, let's talk and make this a little bit personal. We'll do another audience quiz here. How many seconds do you think it takes on average to look down? Say you text me, hey Lee, let's go to lunch at Bob's Burgers. I'd look down, I read that text really quick, and I look back up to the road. How long do you think it takes me to get my phone out, look at that, and my eyes are off the road while I'm doing that? I see 4 seconds, 5 seconds, 4, 5, 6 seconds. So let's start on the low end. Let's say it's only 3 seconds. Say I'm really fast with my phone because I'm really well practiced at texting and driving. So if I'm going the speed limit, which we know, let's do another audience quiz. These are fun. So the posted speed limit on Clearwater is 35 miles an hour. How often do you drive down Clearwater and actually go 35 miles an hour? How often are you going 40 miles an hour? 45 miles an hour, somewhere in there. So again, think about that as we're talking these numbers. When I say 35 miles an hour, that's the best case scenario. People are probably going a few miles an hour faster. So at 35 miles an hour, you're traveling at 51 feet per second. So just to make our math easy, let's say 50 feet per second. So I look down to receive a text for 3 seconds. I've traveled 150 feet down the road like this. So I'm not looking at the roadway at all. Then that's just to get my phone out and read the text. Now, if I want to reply and say, you know what, I don't really want to go to Bob's Burgers and Brew, let's go to Dickey's Barbecue. It takes me probably a little bit longer to text that back while I'm looking down. So if I'm traveling 150 feet down the road, just looking down at my phone, you can see how damaging this problem is. So to make that even worse, when we investigate collisions and recreate a collision and re-engineer what happened in the collision, we figure about a 1.5 second perception reaction time into our numbers to figure on normal person without pre-anticipating what's happening, without knowing there's going to be a problem, I'm going to have to slam on my brakes really quick. It's about a 1.5 second perception reaction time for your brain to take the information from your eye and to say, man, the brake light's on that car in front of me all of a sudden. All that processing takes till the time your foot hits the brake pedal is about 1.5 seconds. So again, that's another 75 feet you travel down the road before your foot touches the brake. So now your foot is on the brake. You still have time that it takes for your vehicle to stop once you apply the brakes. So if you have a fully functioning brake system in your car at 35 miles per hour, I did the math real quick at home this morning, and that takes you about 58 feet to stop. From the time your foot hits the brake pedal, you apply the brakes for your vehicle to come to a stop. So if we add those two up, so now I've had this 3 second time, I've traveled 150 feet where I'm looking down at my phone. Now I look up and say, oh no, there's a problem. And I hit the brake and apply the brake, and my vehicle actually comes to a stop. I've traveled another 133 feet from the time I saw the problem. And this is figuring in there's nothing in front of you. So in an ideal world, we send that 3 second, or we read that text for 3 seconds. We travel 150 feet. We look up. Everything goes right with my vehicle. I stop in about 133 feet. So we've traveled almost the length of a football field when we think about it in those terms. We've gone farther than the length of this room from the time I looked down to the time I look back up and applied my brakes and my vehicle has come to a stop. So think about it in those terms. And that's just on the low end, like we talked about. If we go 5 or 6 seconds, we almost double that distance it takes us to stop. And we almost double that distance we travel while we're looking down at our phone. And as you saw on the first slide here, this is more than just a texting problem. So I'll share a couple of really quick examples here as we come to a close of different things. So in my 9 years of investigating collisions, on average, I probably investigate or respond to 400 collisions a year. So I go to a lot of collisions in the city of Kennewick here, get to see a lot of different things. So all those examples I threw out there earlier for people to raise their hands to were collisions I've responded to where that was the reason somebody wasn't paying attention to the road. Eating French fries was one. A guy ran into a couple of parked cars and rolled his car because he had dropped a French fry on the floor. Another guy just a couple of months ago over here by the mini storage units at Deschutes and Colorado rolled his pickup because his garage door opener fell out of the console and he needed to pick it up right then, even though he's nowhere near his garage door. Changing a CD. We had one near 4th and 395. I was pretty new in the traffic unit then. A guy was changing the CD in his car and he dropped the CD, so he bent down to pick it up, and as he did that, he swerved off the road and he ran over a guy that was standing at the bus stop on the sidewalk there. So here's this poor guy waiting for the bus, standing there minding his own business in the shade, and he gets run over by a car that's come clear off the roadway because the guy's changing a CD. A lot of people will pull over and say, it looked like you were texting when you're driving, and they kind of get smug and they say, well, I wasn't texting. Well, you were on your phone, what were you doing? And they think it's legal because they weren't texting, so they'll just say, well, I was checking the movie times, or I was checking my Facebook page. It's still not legal to do those things either. It's specifically not legal to text and drive, but you still can't have your phone out updating your Facebook status while you're driving down the road. A lot of people aren't aware of that. Let's see. One guy dropped he had a 2-scoop ice cream cone, dropped the ice cream in his lap. Obviously, that's a troubling thing to have happen while you're driving down the road, but you need to pull over and take care of that issue while you're stopped, not as you're going 35 or 40 miles an hour down the road. One that I had just last week as well, someone had a spider crawling on her, and she's deathly afraid of spiders. There's probably I see a lot of grimacing here. But her mistake was, instead of hitting the gas or the brake pedal, she hit the gas and she buried her car into a daycare. She drove right through the wall. Luckily, she went into a classroom that all the kids were in the other half of the building. So these distracted driving things are far-ranging. They can happen to anybody. And the last one that I'll close with, that's kind of a funny one, is we get this a lot of time in the summertime when the weather is good and warm. People are watching those of the opposite sex run down the side of the road as they're jogging. And before the ladies in the room get too smug, this isn't just a problem for the ladies, or for the men watching ladies run. We also have a lot of ladies watching men run that run into the back of other cars too. So this is a very far-ranging problem. And as you can see, I have one more slide here that just has some more stats on it. These are just more factors on the collision reports that show us why people are running into other cars. So as you can see here, this is a huge problem in Washington State, in our community, in our nation. And why is it such a huge problem? Because people literally are getting hurt and getting killed by this. And we all share the monetary load for that. Hopefully everybody in here has automobile insurance and home insurance and medical insurance. Well, we all shoulder the load for that. When these collisions happen and there's a huge payout, everyone has to share the load for that rate because the company isn't going to take the entire hit for it. So we all share that load with our auto insurance rates, our home insurance rates, and our medical insurance rates. And another factor is, like I mentioned, this roundabout right here. I've been to several crashes in this roundabout, so none of us are safe day or night when we leave here. We just have to drive defensively thinking that. So just because your light turns green doesn't mean you should blindly see the light in front of you as green and hit the gas and race through the intersection. When your light turns green, take just half a second and check each direction and make sure there's not a distracted driver or an impaired driver that's about to come through a red light and come right into the side of your car. Please be cognizant of that. And locally and statewide, especially in this area, we're blessed with a great law enforcement community where we work very well together. So a lot of these things, we do joint efforts and we work together and we pool our resources to work together to help educate people on why this is so dangerous and why this is such a huge problem. Some of the places that you can go to look for this is the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, NHTSA. Their website is very helpful. The Washington State Traffic Safety Commission, Washington State Department of Transportation, Washington State Patrol all have links to information like this, and it's all very helpful. And the thing I'll close with, I'm glad Dr. Person mentioned this, the app. It reminded me, there's apps for distracted driving on your phones. A lot of them are free. I know through AT&T and Verizon and some of the other carriers, you can download a free app. And this is especially helpful if you have teenage kids. You can download the app onto the phone and set it so that the phone will actually detect when it's going roadway speeds. So if your phone is moving along through the world at 35 miles an hour or so, your phone will not allow you to text or receive text. The text will come in. It won't alert you that the text has come in until you stop. So there's a lot of very helpful tools out there available to help combat this. Thank you for your time.
Our last presenter is representing a Tri-City-wide task force looking at sexual exploitation of minors using the internet. I think you will find his information highly impactful and give you some additional things to think about how we can improve the lives of our kids in this community. Chief Skinner is from the city of Richland. Please help me welcome Chief Skinner.
Well, thank you very much, and it is certainly my pleasure to be here. And it occurred to me while I listened to Officer Cooper speak that one of the greatest regrets in my life is that I never became a motor officer. I mean, those boots are just fantastic. But the one thing that really pleases me more than that is the fact that he pulls them off so much better than Chief Holmberg did back in the 70s. But I know he has a special affinity for his time on motors, and we really do appreciate all that they do with keeping our community safe as it pertains to traffic enforcement, and everything that he talked about was so very true, and I have been so guilty of so many of those habits, as we all have, and at this point now we get to make a choice as we move forward on whether or not we're going to change behavior or continue to put each other at risk, and so I appreciate that presentation. My presentation is going to be a little bit different. When we had this conversation about me coming and talking about a few things and trying to identify what topic would be good for this community forum, it came down to two amazing choices. I either got to talk about the commercial sexual exploitation of our children and human trafficking, or I got to talk about the internet crimes against children. What two uplifting topics for us to discuss, but important topics to discuss, because I think part of what this forum is designed to do is to shine kind of that bright light in those dark corners of our society that maybe only law enforcement's paying attention to, or advocates in the room that I know that you're paying attention to as well and doing great work. And so what we're going to talk a little bit about today is we're going to talk about what's going on in your area. This is not a problem I'm going to talk from a national perspective. This is a problem I'm going to talk about that is happening in the Tri-City region and what law enforcement is trying to do about it, understanding that law enforcement cannot do it alone, that our social service providers, our faith-based organizations, our volunteer services come alongside us to try and make an impact on what's going on.
My name is Alicia Kozakevich, and when I was 13 years old, I was abducted by an internet predator.
In 2002, I was totally clueless as to the dangers of the internet. My daughter was sitting in a common room talking to a box. Mm-hmm. Yeah, to my mind, that's what she was doing. All of the knowledge of the world is able to be gotten now through the internet.
Alicia had been engaging in online discussions with Scott Tyree, who was then a 40-year-old computer programmer from Herndon, Virginia. He was interested in sadomasochistic activity. He wanted to be a master for teen slave girls. He was looking for a child to make his sex slave. And Alicia was just starting to use the computer at that time and starting to use the internet and to engage in discussions of a sexually curious nature. And she talked with him about some of these activities, which I'm convinced she had no idea what he was talking about.
And then on New Year's Day of 2002, we were having a family dinner. And between dinner and dessert, as I was clearing the table, Alicia went up to her room. And we called her down for dessert, and she was gone.
I trusted him wholeheartedly. He was a friend, no matter what. He was my best friend and confidant. Tell him anything. He had the answer for any question. I remember opening the door and feeling the wind bite my face and being at the top of the hill and hiding behind a tree. And when I said, you know what, why am I here? You know, my senses came back for a moment. Why am I here? And I went to turn around and he called my name.
So when he brought Alicia to his home, he immediately abused her and then videotaped that abuse. And he broadcast this to his friends, to his network. And it was one of those individuals who saw this activity that reported it to law enforcement.
Well, he held me captive by a chain to my neck and a locked collar for 4 days. And he had a dungeon in the basement. And I mean, let your worst nightmares come to your mind, and that's what happened. You know. I was beaten and raped and tortured and treated like an animal. The rescue now. That morning, before he left for work, he said, what did he say? He said, I'm starting to like you too much. So we're gonna go for a ride tonight. At which point I knew that it was do or die.
At the time the FBI entered Tyree's residence, Alicia was chained to the floor in his bedroom. She had a locked collar around her neck, and she was wearing just her panties. And the FBI immediately gave her a jacket, and she was very frightened.
They came in and busted down the door, and I was relieved, extremely relieved, once I saw those 3 letters, FBI, on the back of their jackets in bold yellow letters. I mean, that's not a feeling you can describe. It's being at the end of the rope, feeling like you're about to die, and then somebody saying, oh, no, you get a second chance at life, here you go. And I feel that I was rescued for a reason. And that reason is to save kids from the same thing happening to them, to show them that it can happen to them, that this is real, this isn't a horror story, a movie. This is real, these people exist.
One of the things that we try and do in law enforcement on behalf of our communities that entrust us with their public safety is to identify those things that we should be paying attention to. Whether you live in Richland or Kennewick, unincorporated Benton County, Pasco, Franklin County. I believe that every law enforcement organization identifies what their core mission is and tries to fulfill that mission, but also tries to identify those special interest areas that are important to this community with respect to livability and community safety. One of those areas that I'm very proud that we as a law enforcement profession have taken on in this area is the Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force. It's a brand new task force that right now has full-time members from Richland and Kennewick. And soon, Benton County has pledged a full-time detective to this task force to do this much-needed work. And so my thanks to those law enforcement partners that have chosen to be a part of something very special. Some of the approaches to the problem that we're going to undertake and have undertook is undercover operations. Undercover operations is our ability to be trained in undercover chat to entice certain child predators forward into acting and exhibiting behaviors that reveal themselves to us, hopefully before they victimize our children. Not always. Sometimes they victimize before, but by the time, but our goal is to insert ourselves into their lives and be able to stop that cycle of victimization. Child pornography investigations. Later on, I'll show you a slide that talks about the Butner study. It's a little bit dated, but it talks about the collection of child pornography and its connection to hands-on victimization and how high that correlation is. And so we believe that we need to pay attention to the child pornography in our area and pay attention to who's sharing these files within our community and give them some much-needed law enforcement attention. Cyber tips and education. Education is the key to all this. Whether we're talking about human trafficking of our children, whether it's labor or sex trafficking, or we're talking about the internet crimes against children, it takes a community that's paying attention and a community that's aware and a community that's educated to help us understand where we need to go look and to give us the tips and to give us the piece of information. This stuff is happening under our nose on a daily basis. You walk through the Columbia Center Mall or any gathering places, and I can guarantee you there is somebody there that is attempting to groom or recruit our youngsters into a life of exploitation. And so it's very important for us to be able to be paying attention, to be educated. Here's an example of an ad that we placed on Craigslist. And I'm going to keep this PG-13, and a lot of these ads are redacted so that I'm not to offend people, but you can use your imagination and understand how this communication happens. And I trust that you can read that ad, and I'm not going to read it for you, but this is one of our undercover officers, highly trained in undercover chat, has placed this ad on Craigslist. The ad was up for 37 minutes until Craigslist pulled it down because they recognized what it was for, which was an offer for underage sex. 37 minutes it got up there, and in that 37 minutes, 37 people responded to the ad from our area. From that 37 people, we entered into an investigation on 3 that have been federally indicted as a result of our undercover officer placing a simple ad on Craigslist. 31-year-old male, explicit chats with undercover officer, and there's part of me that if I didn't think I would shock the conscience so poorly, that I would love to share with you the type of communication that goes on between these people, but I'm not going to. But again, you can use your imagination. Attempted to meet the girl on multiple occasions, and he's a local school district janitor. And federal charges are currently pending. Second one, a 55-year-old male. 2 prior convictions of rape of a child. Mailed sex toys to the officer at a fictitious address. Attempted to meet the girl in a local park here in the Tri-Cities. Federal charges are pending. The third was a 35-year-old male, registered sex offender, convicted of rape in the 1st degree, lived across the street from a local high school. Explicit chats and photographs are often seen in these cases. And again, federal charges are pending on this individual as well. The other piece of this is undercover chat operations from mostly men that are placing ads looking for young women on Craigslist as well. They're placed out there for everybody to see, and there's such a brashness to what they're doing. It's almost as if there is no regard for their personal well-being, and it's almost as if they want to be caught because of how brazen they are. And here's one of those ads, placed in our community by this individual. And you can read the ad and see, and you can fill in the blanks on what's being said, hoping to entice a young woman to reach out and communicate with him. He was a foster parent. 13 to 16 kids placed into his residence. Process of adopting 2 children. And to date, we have at least one disclosure of sexual abuse from one of those children. Here's another ad placed in our local area. Highly redacted because of the nature of the content. And I've read this content, and I can tell you that any of the over-the-counter publications that you can buy at local convenience stores are nothing compared to what this individual was saying in his ad and subsequent with his chat with our undercover officer. 51-year-old male, Hanford professional with security clearance. We've talked many times when we're talking about abuse, whether it's sexual or physical abuse, that it crosses all demographics, all socioeconomic backgrounds. This is not something that's happening in our poor neighborhoods. This is something that's happening in our neighborhoods. You can see the initial correspondence from the suspect admitting to 17-year-olds engaging in sexual endeavors with 17-year-olds, being suspicious and asking for pictures to help him feel more secure in what he's doing. Here's another one. Interstate truck driver. Suspect sent explicit photos of himself and videos. The officer currently serving 6 years with 15 years supervision to follow. I give you those illustrations to let you know that this is a community problem, it's a local problem, and it's a problem that's worth paying attention to. And it's a problem that law enforcement is taking very seriously and is focused on, but it's only one part of the problem. The other part of the problem is the file sharing that's occurring in our communities of child pornography. These children have been victimized as a result of their photographs and videos being taken, and they're being shared around the area and nationally. And the way it works is that each file that depicts a minor in child pornography is assigned a hashtag value, which is like metadata that we're able to track to find out when it's uploaded, when it's downloaded, and eventually who's viewing it. What you're looking at here is a screenshot from a program that we have that identifies the number of files being shared by a particular IP address in Franklin County. 297 different files being downloaded of child pornography by this individual at this IP address. More astonishing is look at this individual in Benton County. 1,560 different files and or videos depicting minor children in child pornography. Part of why we keep track of that is the Butner study. I mentioned this to you earlier. There's a study conducted in 2009 that identified the relationship between collectors of child pornography, and that's the way they view themselves, is that they're simply collectors of child pornography for their own personal use. But it connects, and there's a correlation between the collection of child pornography and the percentage chance that they're going to be a hands-on predator and have hands-on victims. And you can see the huge instances where that occurs. So this is not just about going after those predators that answer online ads or post online ads. It's about going after those individuals who are engaging in the collection of child pornography in our areas, knowing that they have a high propensity for victimization, and putting ourselves in the path, an attempt to prevent victimization of our children. But that's only one piece of the puzzle, because we all know our kids are being victimized. We all know that these individuals that listed these ads, posted these ads, or answered these ads, this is not the first time they've done that. You don't go from being a Hanford security professional one day, having no notion of wanting to have sex with a minor, and going to posting an ad and hoping to fulfill your fantasies. I can guarantee you law enforcement will tell you through their experience, and research will tell you through their studies, that this is the type of behavior that has a tendency to be pervasive, and that's the type of behavior that just doesn't happen. There's usually, most likely, gradual behaviors that lead you to be so brash as to come to Richland in one of our most popular parks and meet a 13-year-old with condoms in hand, duct tape in hand, and rope in hand. I'm sure some of you will have some questions. I'm guessing we'll have some time afterwards for those questions. I'd like to take this closing remark to just say thanks for the opportunity to discuss this topic. Thank you to my law enforcement partners for their partnership and collaboration on this. And I guess my challenge to you as a community, as you take this information back, is to ask yourself, what can we do? How can I get involved? If you reach out to me, I'm happy to point you in the right direction, happy to give you the resource material that you need, and happy to extend opportunities for continued education and training so that you can be our eyes and ears out in the community as we combat this very difficult problem. Thank you.